We're now learning that displaced Sudanese families have arrived at a UN refugee camp in the town of Tawila after escaping the famine-stricken Darfur city of Al-Fashir. New arrivals were registered by UNHCR before setting up tents and temporary shelters, joining thousands already seeking safety as conditions deteriorate across the region. Aid assessments conducted before this latest influx have found that only 10% of people in Tawila's camps had reliable access to water, with even fewer having access to proper latrines. The influx is now placing additional strain on already limited humanitarian resources. Now, the conflict between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces has escalated into what the United Nations now describes as the world's largest humanitarian crisis, worsened by shrinking global aid budgets. Now, as of mid-October, which is about a month back, an estimated 12.5 million Sudanese had been displaced both within and outside the country, with another 140,000 people recently forced to flee RSF attacks on Al-Fashir and towns in the Kordofan region as well. With us on the broadcast is Ms. Shruti Dasgupta, International Affairs expert, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. Day by day, we're seeing this crisis in Sudan continue to escalate. The UN has come out with its report stating that more than 100,000 people have now fled Al-Fashir after the RSF had taken control. The RSF has of course carried out summary executions, sexual violence as well. We've seen those satellite images with piles and piles of dead bodies and blood literally visible by those satellite images as well on the roads. In spite of all of this, and the Trump administration trying to move the ceasefire plan, we're seeing the RSF trying to push eastwards towards Kordofan, which eventually is the route to Khartoum.
You're absolutely right. Sudan is facing a massive crisis, but that's not a new one. It has been facing crisis since 1989, since where it went through a dictatorship for 30 years. But when it did gain a democratic government, it was toppled within 2 years. And since then, it has been in a constant state of war. And because it is not in the first world, this conflict has not gained the kind of eyebrows and actions that it deserves. I believe the RSF has also been told, that has also been observed to be burning people's body and then burying the remains. A very inhuman act, just so that they can prevent the genocide act that could trigger massive sanctions against them, or even have them reported as a terrorist group rather than a militia. So what we see is a struggle for control. Unfortunately, the Sudanese army, even though it has the locals fighting for them, other warring tribes joining them, they are not as much in control of the situation as they should have been. And the RSF is gaining traction every single day. And unfortunately for all of us, this particular action has led to a large number of people fleeing their homes just because the color of their skin is not light enough. And that should be shameful for a world that is claiming to be in the 21st century and beyond the language we speak or the color of our skin. So it's a very shameful act. UN is right to trigger alarms. US is right to ask that the arms supply through whichever vendor is going through should be stopped. There should be sanctions in place so that at least some semblance of peace can be seen. Otherwise, we will have another nation just destroying itself under the rule of the gun.
Absolutely. Since you've spoken about the arms supply, we do know that the United Arab Emirates does have its interests in backing the RSF. There have been several reports that have come to light. Of course, there was also a report in 2024 by the United Nations that had detailed the same. What are the UAE's considerations? It is a food insecure country itself, and there are a lot of murmurs going around that some of its top agro processing businesses have invested in Sudan and therefore are backing the RSF in order to gain as much profit as possible, because the area itself, the country itself, is very resource rich, not just agriculturally but also in terms of oil, natural gas, gold.
You're absolutely right. Unfortunately, all of it always boils down to the resources a nation or the land has, and the weakness of the government that can be there, and the fault lines that can be exploited by more powerful nations. UAE, of course, has extended its support, at least verbally, to USA's proposal of banning arms towards RSF. That is a minor step there, that at least they're willing to acknowledge that it might be a graver situation than they are willing to take on their conscience. But the oil reserves, when South Sudan's kind of separated from Sudan itself, the oil reserves are not as extensive as they used to be, but the gold is a large, Sudan would be the third largest manufacturer in Africa of gold. And so there is a lot to be exploited from that particular nation, and as long as it continues in the state of civil war, the people that are controlling these strings of power, they are able to exploit the resources as much as possible, and the human cost is not something that they would actually take into account in their profit margins. So this is a sad state of affair, and I hope UAE steps up and stops backing a nation where the RSF, which is now the gaining force in Sudan, is able to continue its massacre of people without facing consequences.
Indeed, and I'd like to ask a quick follow-up to this, because we've recently seen a meeting between the UAE president and the president of the Republic of Chad, Mohamed Idris Deby Itno. Interestingly, UAE and Chad are discussing trade and investments, but we do know that Chad borders Sudan to the west. It is the province which is right next to Darfur. A lot of people say that the weapons supply, the arms supply to the RSF takes place through Chad. What more can you add to this?
Well, let's look at Darfur itself. That is where let's say the genealogy or the legacy of RSF is the Janjaweed. If I'm not Janjaweed is the right name. That was the militia group earlier that worked under under that dictator. I'm forgetting his name. Please pardon me. But for the 30 years that was the dictator of Sudan, the Janjaweed were working right there. They held ethnic cleanses in Darfur, and the world had closed their eyes and ears to that travesty. So it continues that legacy. They take on new names under new forms of dictators, or they plan to be one themselves. And no matter what, although Chad is close to it, and we know that there is a problem, it can also play an important role in showing that the world does not stand with genocide. So I hope that the trade meetings included a little bit of Sudan's humanity problem as far as UAE is concerned.
Absolutely, ma'am. Requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking some further updates. We're shifting our focus away from Africa, Sudan in particular, towards what's happening in Europe. A government official has now stated that Serbia